operates Cuba's first and only kosher boutique hotel. And so it is an honor and a privilege to welcome him here this evening. Some people call Cuban Jews Jubans, Jewish Cubans. And anyone I've ever spoken to who went to Cuba came back and said it was a fascinating experience. So it's really a pleasure to have with us tonight's speaker, Saul, who will share with us about the history and also the current present situation in Cuba and what the future looks like. And so Saul's presentation will last approximately 40 minutes. And following that, there'll be questions and answers. So just type your questions into the chat box and we will present him with your questions at the end of his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Saul Berenthal.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me with you today. It's a pleasure to be able to share a little bit of, I guess, my life and Cuba's history and give you a little bit of a perspective of what happened, what's happening now, and what I may think may happen in the future. So if we can set up the presentation, what I'll do is put some charts that will have some words in it, but I will talk about things that you see on the chart, but not necessarily read you what the chart says. So this is Cuba. Cuba is the biggest island in the Caribbean. But the Cuban people like to think of it as an archipelago. It sounds a little bit more resounding, and they like to show themselves as more important. I myself like to think about Cuba in the way that the Secretary of Commerce of North Carolina told me he thought when he visited Cuba with me a couple of years ago. He said to me, Cuba's not an island. Cuba is a country. And that's the way I look at it. It is a country. It is a country that is made up of about 11 million people living in Cuba. But about 18 to 20% of its population lives outside of Cuba, mainly almost 2 million in the US, most of which in southern Florida, where you guys live. And it is a divided country. It has divided ideals. And we are now beginning to see a new opportunity for new things to happen in the future. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. So, next chart. Well, I'll talk about it because I know what it is all about. When Columbus came to Cuba, he wanted to name it Juana in honor of Don Juan, Isabel's son. But the Indians called it Cubanacan. Guess who won? Cuba, part of Cubanacan, is what gave its name to the archipelago. When Columbus came, it is true what the rabbi said. Most of the historians will agree that there were Jews with him in his first trip. The issue is who were the Jews? Why were they there? How many of them were there? And how come was it that there were Jews in this trip? Well, it was the Inquisition. The jails were full of Jews, both marranos and conversos. By the way, the word marrano means pig in Spanish. Conversos were typically the ones that said that they had converted, but not necessarily saw. And when they started up selecting the crew, they gave an opportunity to people in jail to volunteer to come. And that's mainly one of the reasons why Jews were part of the first expedition. The real truth, however, or the most important truth, is that the expedition was not financed by selling the jewels of Isabel and Fernando. They were actually financed by Jews from Portugal by the names of Abravanel, Santangel, and Sanchez, all Jewish names. So the financing of the expedition was done by the Jews. So who are the Cubans? When Columbus first arrived in Cuba, there were mainly three tribes of Indians: Taínos, Guanahatebeyes, and Caribes. Needless to say that the Indians were enslaved and pretty much disappeared very rapidly, which motivated Spain to start bringing slaves from Africa to Cuba. Cuba became a place where African slaves were brought in and then sold and shipped to the US. You may remember a movie by the name of Amistad, which recounts one of the ships that was bringing African slaves from Havana to the US, and they rioted. Chinese were also brought into Cuba to work in the sugarcane, but they came a little bit later after the Africans. And then, of course, because of the two world wars, the Jews, first a wave of Sephardic Jews, and then a wave of Ashkenazi Jews. Jose Marti, why am I talking about Jose Marti? Jose Marti is, I guess, the equivalent of Washington. He was the father, George Washington, the father of the country. And in relation to the Jews, it's interesting to know that he, although was Cuban and lived mostly in New York and in Key West, was raising funds for the Cuban independent war. I'll talk a little bit more about what the independent war is all about. But it was a Jewish American lawyer and a couple of Romanian Jews that helped him raising funds for the war. The war at the time was a Cuban war of independence from Spain, but it quickly turned into the Spanish-American War. And now let me talk about why it turned into the Spanish-American War. Some of you might have heard about a ship by the name of Maine, the Maine. Some people even talk about Remember the Maine. The Maine was an American warship that was set up in front of the Havana harbor during the War of Independence of Cuba from Spain. By some reason, it exploded and it sank and it killed, I think it was 300 US sailors that were there. It was then used as the reason of the US entering the Spanish-American War. There's a lot of different interpretations as to, was it an accident? Was it done on purpose so that they would be able to declare war on Spain? There's all kinds of interpretations. I'd like to think that it was a way for the Americans to help the Cubans gain independence from Spain. The first Jews in Cuba, they came because they were running from the wars. First the First World War and then the Second World War. And the first Jews that really arrived in Cuba were American Jews that came to Cuba after the Spanish-American War. If you see the picture of the cemetery, you will see that the inscription at the top is in English. It was the American, I would call them carpetbaggers, that first came to Cuba and established the first Jewish community in Cuba. It is in a suburb of Havana called Guanabacoa. And it has two Jewish cemeteries, one that is Sephardic and one that is Ashkenazi. So the first migration of Cuba was around 1914. It was mainly Sephardic Jews, didn't like the big city, So they kind of moved around to the other parts of the country. The second wave, where both my parents came, was Ashkenazi Jews fleeing from Second World War, persecution, Nazism, etc. They came to Cuba as a staging place to be able to come to the US, but pretty soon they liked it and they stayed. My parents came from two different places. My mom was from Poland. My father was from Romania, but they happened to have met in Cuba and got married in Cuba. And I was born and raised. I was born in 1944. I'll talk a little bit more about myself later on, but it gives you an idea of the parts of history that I did experience firsthand. Communism, Communist Party of Cuba. Yeah, it was founded in 1925, and sure enough, Jews collaborated in the founding of the Communist Party. Some of them didn't even know enough Spanish, so they had to use translators. And some of those original Jews that were part of that Communist Party that was founded in 25 remained in Cuba even after the revolution. They had the principles of communism so vivid in their being that they related to the communist revolution in Cuba. Now we are pretty much at the time in which I lived in Cuba. What was Cuba during the 40s and 50s? I was born in 44, so I lived and was conscious about Cuba during the late 40s and the early and mid 50s, all the way to 1961 when I left. Cuba was a paradise. Cuba was a place that not only had the beautiful beaches and the nice weather, but it also had the benefit of being right next door to the US, and therefore had a tremendous market for people who wanted to come and do in Cuba the things that they couldn't do in the US, such as gambling, going to beaches, all kinds of different sins that you could perpetrate in Cuba that you couldn't do in the US. And that's what attracted a lot of tourism in Cuba. Needless to say that the people in charge of the biggest mafia operation at the time were Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky, both landsmen of ours. A lot of histories from them, but we will not discuss them at this point. Let's talk about cars. I learned as I came to the US that what I knew in Cuba to be the love affair between the Cubans and the cars also existed in this country. So it was not surprise for me to arrive here and see that everybody had the same type of reverence to American cars at the time. Well, Cuba has pretty much stopped in time when it comes to cars. Those cars that we all grew up in the 40s and 50s are still there. And it is one of the biggest attractions of American tourists when they come to Cuba. They love to see the cars. They love to ride in the cars. They look a lot like the original cars, but I can tell you that inside they have nothing to do with the original cars. So why did John Paul come to Cuba, and why was it so important? As a communist country, Cuba eliminated religion, all religions, including us Jews. It's not that we were forbidden from practicing our religion, but if you practiced any religion, you were not accepted in the community. You were not accepted in the social life. You didn't even have the ability to have a job. So most people became non-religious. All three synagogues in Havana closed. Jews kept their religion at home. But as things do happen in time, during the late 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the economy of Cuba pretty much disappeared. And at the time, the Cuban government had to come up with something that would replace the economic help that Russia gave Cuba. And the only thing that they could think about was tourism, to resurrect the 1940s, the 1950s in terms of tourism and bring hard currency by means of bringing tourists to Cuba. First thing that they had to do was to eliminate restrictions on religion. And therefore they invited Pope John Paul II to come to Cuba and show everybody that religion was allowed in Cuba. All the synagogues, all the churches, all the cathedrals were open, and the Jewish community, of course, took its place and opened up the 3 synagogues in Havana. So my story, it starts with, as you can see on the left, I'm the little kid that was inaugurating, or was part of the inauguration of the Patronato, which is the Ashkenazi synagogue in Havana. It was inaugurated in 1955. If you look at the right of the chart, you see me leaving Cuba in late 1960. So I was part of the Jewish community that left because of the revolution, and not because the idealism or communism or anything. It's just because that under the new regime, Cubans were mostly merchants, and there was really no way of making a living when the government took over the running of all of the businesses in Cuba. So my parents sent me out, and I went to Miami. I arrived with about 20 boxes of cigars, which was my startup capital in the US. I lived with my uncle for a little while in Miami, but I pretty soon left Miami because if you were going to be an American, you couldn't live in Miami. So I went to New York, went to school, graduated, went to work for IBM. Worked for IBM for about 18 years. Got married, had kids, and left IBM to start the American dream my way. Me and my business partner started a software development company to compete with IBM. We were very successful. We founded 3 different companies that developed software for computers. And after the 3rd one, in 2008, I decided, okay, so now I'm retired. Let me go see what happened in Cuba. So I went to Cuba. I took the kids just to show them the roots and started to see what was going on. And it was very curious. It was very interesting to me. Met with the Jewish community. I knew personally some of the leaders of the community. We hadn't seen ourselves for years, for 50 years, but we started a relationship. And I thought about what are the things that I can do to help the community, what are the things that I can do to help make things a little bit better, not only to the Jews, but to everybody in Cuba as well. After all, I am a Cuban. And me and my business partner decided that one of the things that we could do was to set up a tractor factory in Cuba, since they need a lot of help and technology in farming in Cuba. That gave us an opportunity when President Obama opened up a better relationship with Cuba. We were given the permission to start up the first company, American-owned company in Cuba, manufacturing tractors. Politics got in the way, and it never got to be realized. But hold on, because things are changing again. But in the meantime, since I couldn't be successful in setting up a factory of tractors, I thought, well, maybe I can be successful in another fashion. And that's when we thought about opening up a hostel in Cuba called Chateau Blanc. Just as an inside knowledge, we wanted to call it the White House, but it was not a good name to be used in Cuba, so we changed it to Chateau Blanc. So where is Cuba today and the Cuban Jewish community? There's about, depending on who and when you ask the question, anywhere between 800 and 1,200 Jews. Most of them live in Havana. There are some cemeteries and private synagogues, private houses, synagogues in private houses in Santa Clara, Matanzas, Camagüey, Oriente, other provinces of Cuba. So whatever it's left is really a combination of some of the original Jews that stayed after the revolution and a lot of people who have become Jewish. So I would say that mostly, if the majority are converts to Judaism.
Through marriage.
Through marriage, right. There are 3 synagogues in Havana. One is an Orthodox, Adat Israel. The other one is a Sephardic, and the other one is an Ashkenazi called Bet Shalom. The Sephardic one is called Centro Hebreo Sefaradi. All right, so we belong to Bet Shalom as a family. But my mother's uncle was the president of Adat Israel. And being that he was the president, I had to do my bar mitzvah in Adat Israel. So that's where I was bar mitzvah. But from a perspective of going to the synagogue on an ongoing basis, we belong to the Ashkenazi, which was and still is a conservative synagogue. Kosher in Cuba. At the time, there was a restaurant called Moshe Pipik. It was very famous at the time, and many of the American Jews that used to come to Cuba always ended up going to Moshe Pipik. It was a good restaurant. It really was nice, and people enjoyed it. There was a kosher bakery, Café Lili. It was owned by some friend of ours. There was a small deli and a butcher that used to sell kosher meat that was brought from Miami. Is there any kosher in Cuba right now? Allegedly, the kosher butcher still is active. He happens to be the rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue. And since the Cuban government provides the meat to the people of Cuba, they give meat, or shall we say cattle or cow, to the rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue for him to shecht and make it kosher and provide it to the Jewish community. How kosher is it? I don't know. In our place, we bring everything from the US that we use in preparing our meals. And we are now in the planning stages of adding a bakery so that we would have kosher bread and goodies as well. But that is something that we are now looking into for the future. I'm going to be going to Cuba December 12th. I'll be there for a couple of weeks. And one of the things that we're exploring because of the new opportunities that are happening in Cuba is to open a kosher bakery as well. Now, This shows you a few of the groups that have come. Of course, we closed with the pandemic in February. We had our last group. We had been open for, I would say, about 6 to 8 months at a time. And these are some of the pictures that we had from some of the groups that had come and visited with us. And also, I wanted to show you a little bit of some of the activities that we had, some of the things that we do. We go and have showings of cigar rolling, salsa dancing, visit with artists in their galleries. We go to Viñales, which is where Cuban tobacco is grown, a very interesting trip. Varadero, which is one of the great beaches of the Caribbean. And of course, some of the American old traditions with Hemingway. A lot of activities, a lot of things to do in Cuba. And everybody that goes always says, I have to come back because I didn't finish doing everything. And these are some of the things that are also available for nightlife that you can enjoy going to Tropicana or do rides in classic cars, the Buena Vista Social Club, etc. Different types of nocturnal entertainment that people do when they are in Cuba. So this is pretty much a little bit of the story of Cuba as I know it, with the Jewish implications, and a little bit of my story of having lived there before, during, and after the revolution. Me and my family are now Cuban citizens again. We are residents of Cuba. We own a house as well as a hostel. I married a Cuban, by the way. Yes, my wife is also a Cuban Jew, by the way. So, our view nowadays is that what we're doing is to help the Jewish community, but to also bring together the Cuban people and the American people the way I used to know that we interacted in the past. It was really a very nice relationship between Cuba and the US. There's no reason why it shouldn't exist again. And what we're doing is trying to make that happen, while in the process, help the Jewish community also. With that, I think we've finished with the presentation. And if there's any questions in particular that you would like to pose, I'd be more than happy to answer. I have some more stories to tell, but I thought that would be best if you guide me through your questions.
Beautiful. So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We do have lots of questions. Let me start with one on the chat, a very practical question. Someone's asking whether it's safe to walk the streets of Cuba. Is there violence? Is there crime? Would a woman feel comfortable walking the streets of Cuba? Tell us a little bit about that.
One of the safest places I have ever been, and I have traveled in this world. Havana is the capital, so it is a big city. Nightlife in Cuba starts about 10 o'clock, believe it or not. And people go out in the streets. And yes, women walk along and they feel safe. We have never had any incidents. It is true that there is a lot of care given to tourism in Cuba. So they make sure that safety is there all the time. They don't want to have any type of problems because that would impact tourism in Cuba.
Okay, very good. Another question is, what about your parents? Did your parents ever leave Cuba?
Yes, they did. After I came as a student with a student visa. And I started school. My father and my mother stayed in Cuba until they were able to tell you the truth, they were able to bring enough money to Miami to start again, close the business in Cuba, and then they moved to Miami. They stayed in Miami, but I left and went to New York because I did wanted to become an American. And if you stayed in Miami as a Cuban, it's difficult.
Okay. Very nice. Tell us, why did you choose that name for your hotel? Someone's asking why you didn't choose a Jewish name.
The White House. The White House. Chateau Blanc. We wanted to imply that this was an American place.
You wanted Americans to feel comfortable.
Correct.
Okay. People are asking if there are investment opportunities.
Very much so. I'll talk a little bit about the economy in Cuba. The economy in Cuba has always been hindered by the embargo, and everybody knows that, and there's no secret about it either in Cuba or here. But Cuba fought the embargo. Cuba found ways around the embargo. Cuba figured out how to exist with the embargo. As a matter of fact, the embargo was a very good excuse as to why the economy in Cuba was not as good as it could have been. But even though the embargo for 60 years was not able to provide for the change of government, the pandemic did. The pandemic has done so much damage to the tourist industry of Cuba, and it has interfered so much with the ability to send remittances to Cuba that the economy in Cuba is in shambles. It's been recognized by the leadership that it is not giving the results that it should be and that it has to change. Changes are coming. Changes have already happened. I don't know if most of you know that Cuba has dual currencies. They have a CUC and a CUP, and one is a national currency and the other one is a tourist currency, and that has twisted the economy. They are now bringing the two currencies together and dollarizing the economy. So that now you will end up with one currency, the CUP, and dollars. Dollars will be worth a lot of CUPs in Cuba. There will be a period of inflation where the dollar will prevail. It'll make things cheaper for people who come with dollars. All of this so that tourism comes to Cuba. They are also, although they started up a private sector, a small private sector in 2011 when Raúl Castro took over, it was a very small type of private sector. For example, we were able to have the hostel under that private sector. You could have a restaurant, you could have a hotel, a small hotel, or your own house could be a hotel. There was a few types of private enterprises that you could have, but nothing grandiose. They are now changing it so that you will have small and medium-sized businesses. And they're giving you a judicial structure that does not, that gives you the ability to separate your own your own wealth from the wealth of a corporation, which induces people to come over and invest. They have also, for many years, although they have said that they would welcome Cuban American investment, they obviously didn't. But now, I believe that they are in the process of accepting Cuban American investment as well as American investment. So there is a lot of opportunities going on right now. In my opinion, agriculture, production of agriculture, technology, machinery, tourism are the areas in which a lot of people could concentrate in getting opportunities.
Thank you. Are there any official or unofficial contacts between the state of Israel and the Cuban government?
Unofficial, yes. There have been a lot of unofficial contacts. As a matter of fact, the citrus industry in Cuba was created by Israel. They brought in experts and let them do the Jewish-Israeli thing, and they were very successful. The historiador de La Habana, I don't know if you've ever heard of the historian of Havana, Eusebio Leal, was a very good friend of the state of Israel, and he used to go and interact with people in Israel and have communications with Israel. All of this, of course, unofficial. But over the last 4 years, that has been reduced significantly because Israel did not want to see itself helping Cuba during the last few years in any way. But I believe that that will change as well.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your motel or inn. Is the food under rabbinic supervision?
Absolutely, absolutely. We work with Rabbi Beryl Simser. He is from International Kosher Mehadrim. He's our certifying agent. And when groups come in, they always come in either with him or a mashgiach that he sends. Everything that we have, we import. At this point, we are now replenishing all of our inventory of food because there hasn't been much traveling between Cuba. Well, Cuba pretty much closed all their airports, and only recently have they opened up the airports to tourism, but there's still a lot of people who are not willing to fly to Cuba. Most people that are going to Cuba right now are Cuban Americans, me being one of them. Me and my wife are going to go there December 12th just to see our people, to meet with the guys, to look at opportunities, and to get the B&B going again. We already had 2 guests last week. Everything worked out pretty good. They were not Jewish guests, but they were there, and we always keep kosher regardless, so it doesn't matter. And we are now revamping to get things going again. We foresee that first quarter, second quarter next year, Jewish groups will start coming back to Cuba.
How many guests could your hotel accommodate?
Well, we have 2 suites and 5 bedrooms. The bedrooms fit anywhere between 1 and 3 people, and the suites are for 4 and 5 people. So depending on how do you want to accommodate yourself or what kind of group do you want to bring, you could have at a minimum 2 people per room. That would be 14 people, and at a maximum 24 people.
You know, you mentioned there are 3 synagogues. Is there one central agency that, you know, acts as the umbrella for all of the Jews in Cuba?
Yes, the Jews in Cuba are represented by Bet Shalom, the Ashkenazi shul, the biggest one, and they interact with the Communist Party. Mm. There is a religious entity of the Communist Party that they interact with.
What's the average income of the families in Cuba?
Okay. That's about to change for multiple reasons. But typically, the average family in Cuba would make the equivalent of about $30 a month. Some more professional people like doctors, engineers, that kind of stuff will make $40, $45 a month. But people who are interacting with tourism, which makes them taxi drivers or guides or hoteliers like we are, they make money not only running their businesses, but on tips. So typically working for the private sector, the average, I would say that the average income for people connected with the tourist sector in Cuba would make around $100 a month.
Wow.
But do remember, everything is about price and everything is about the structure of the country. Education is free. Medicine is free. The house that you live in, the government gave to you. You didn't have to buy it, it's yours. You have a minimum booklet where you can get a minimum amount of food on a monthly basis, given to you by the government. And then the electricity, the telephone, all the utilities are very subsidized. Just to give you an example, our house, we live in a house, big house. It's got 4 bedrooms, et cetera, et cetera. The first time I was there and they came to collect the electricity bill, and they do come to collect the electricity bill in Cuba, the lady gives me a bill and I said, okay, how much is that? And she says, well, it's so much. And I go on my head and I convert it into dollars, and it was about $5. And I said, okay, I'll pay all for it. She said, that's good, because last time the people who lived here pay for the whole year as well. So in other words, I was paying $5 for a whole year of electricity.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea.
Are the Jews in Cuba right now struggling to stay afloat financially? Do they have enough of their basic needs right now, or is there a shortage?
Well, there is a, how do I say this? There's a shortage of food in Cuba all across the country. Worse outside Havana. You have the minimum booklet that you can get in vegetables and fruit and a little bit of rice and a little bit of beans and stuff like that the government provides. But anything else that you want to or need to buy, you have to buy in the market, in the free market. And that means that if you want to have anything that is significant, you have to have dollars to buy it. And very few people have dollars, especially because the remittances have been suspended from the US. So they are struggling, especially the Jews that make up a lot of the elder population. And those are retired, and they have retirement facilities and retirement salaries, if you will, Social Security, which is very low in the scale of income. We try to bring our groups to bring tzedakah. We try to bring our groups to share with them, to bring medicine and all that kind of stuff. And that helps. But my impetus right now is to try to convince them that rather than living from tzedakah, to work with me in investing in some opportunities. Like, for example, the bakery. I would love to open a bakery and have some of the people in the Jewish community to work in the bakery. I would love to have some people in the Jewish community to help me out in other ideas that we have to open up a farm to grow chicken so that we can have kosher chickens in Cuba. So there's a few things that I'm intending to do, but it is very difficult to convince people who have been used to live off the government and off tzedakah to do anything other than try to do the same thing that they've known how to do. Making that change is rather difficult. But I keep giving it a try. And by the way, the other thing that we do, which I feel is very important, is to rebuild the cemeteries. The cemeteries were pretty much in bad shape. I spoke to, I mentioned him before, Eusebio Leal, the historian of Havana. Eusebio Leal, which passed away recently, by the way. His name was Eusebio Leal Spengler. And he switched his last names. So Spengler was his mother's name, and it is of Jewish descendancy. So he had a little bit of kindness to the Jewish people. And he put together a plan to help us rebuild the cemetery. And he did a lot of good until he passed away recently. He was a good man. He was a good man. I remember last time I saw him, this was in February, last time I was in Havana, he was already very, very sick. I went to visit with him, I usually did. And one of the things that he asked me was to send him a kosher meal. He thought that would help him. And then he asked me also to, if and when it happened, to come and say Kaddish for him. So that's one of my duties when I go back. Good man, very good man.
The only way you could go to Cuba is through a mission, or you could go as an individual privately?
You can go as an individual as long as you have a reason for being there. I have a reason because I live there, or I have family there, or I have friends. Some people go because they want to see education. Some people go because they want to see agriculture. Some people go because they want to see art. Some people go, et cetera, et cetera. As long as you don't stay in a government-owned facility and you don't go eat at a government-owned facility, Americans are able to go there. Mm-hmm. It's called people-to-people exchanges.
Mm-hmm. And are Jews able to leave if they want to immigrate?
Yes, the problem is that it's very difficult for other countries to give them visas to immigrate. Israel, of course, they are able to do that. The US used to allow for about 20,000 visas a year, but they have not issued any visas to Cuban since the last 4 years.
So is there any aliyah effort to bring Jews from Cuba to Israel?
Oh yeah, but the point is not to send the Jews out of Cuba. The point is to give the Cuban Jews a reason to stay in Cuba, is the way I look at it. To give them the ability to make a living in Cuba, to give them the ability to bring other Jewish people to Cuba. I used to live there. We're about 15, 20,000 Jews, nice families. My wife's family, Jewish family, my Jewish family, many people lived and make a living in Cuba, being Jewish. That's what I would like to see come back.
Is there
Aliyah to me is just a stopgap.
Right. But you said that Jews don't have enough food. So we either have to get them more food and what they need or help them.
Well, medicine and food. That's primordial for them right now. I'm going there right now, and you're limited to the number of suitcases and things that you can bring. But guess what we're bringing? We're bringing food and medicine.
Is there a place that people on this Zoom, if they wanted to send food, medicine, is there a method to send help for the Jews of Cuba?
Yes. There is an organization called Pack for a Purpose that if you travel to Cuba, they will organize you to how to bring stuff with you. As far as shipping stuff to Cuba, yes, there is a mechanism that allows for Cuban Americans to send goods to their relatives in Cuba. That's done by charter freight. It's very expensive, and it happens, and people do it for their families and friends in Cuba. There's also a couple of websites where you can buy goods here and they get delivered in Cuba. I can buy potatoes and chicken and fruit and oil and rice and beans. I pay for it here, but they are delivered to my friend in Cuba. These are Cuban products that are delivered to Cubans, but the transaction occurs here through a credit card.
Right. Have things gotten better since the passing of Fidel Castro?
My opinion, yes. My opinion is that Raúl Castro, his brother, has done a lot to liberalize the economy of Cuba. He has just been, I would say, stopped by the embargo, and now, of course, by the pandemic. But by the way, he was communist before Fidel was communist, but he is a very pragmatic person. he understands the issues, the problems, and the solutions. But there's been many years of communism that don't change overnight. So these are changes that have to occur over time. And they are occurring even faster now because of the situation derived by the pandemic that is going on. Without tourism and without remittances, Cuba cannot exist. Cuba used to, well, to a degree it still does. They import 80% of what they eat because they cannot produce it there. So now they don't have currency to import food. Now they have to produce it there. That's why I'm going back with my tractor factory. It's one of the projects that I'm looking at.
Right.
Now may be the time in which they say, yeah, maybe we should have a tractor factory.
Right. How has the pandemic, in terms of life, have there been a lot of deaths in Cuba from the pandemic?
The first thing you got to do is accept their statistics. From everything I know, these are realistic statistics. There's 80 some odd thousand cases, 133 deaths since the beginning. Now, one of the advantages of a very strong government is that when they tell you something, you do it. When they say you don't get out of the house, you don't get out of the house. When they say you wear a mask, you wear a mask. When they say you keep your distance, you keep your distance. If they see something happening in an area, they cordon it out. They make sure that they follow the well-established regulations on how to deal with a pandemic like this.
They go to your house.
The medical system is set up in such a way that doctors and nurses come to your house to check you. You don't even have to go to a doctor, they come to you. Like, for example, when I go to Cuba right now in December, the first thing that they do is they'll do a test, a PCR test on me. They'll tell me to stay home until they get results on that test. If it is negative, they'll wait 5 days and give you another test. And if that's negative, then you can begin to walk around.
And everyone wears masks all the time outside?
They wear masks all the time, everywhere you go. And keep their distances. And trust me, when they tell you you're going to do it, you do it.
Right. Is there a mikveh in Cuba?
Adat Israel was built with one. Is it functioning? No.
So Jewish women just don't have a mikveh there?
They have the sea.
Oh, okay. Is that what they do?
Well, there's a lot of ocean around Cuba.
Right.
Very, very few people keep Orthodox in Cuba. It's very difficult.
Right. Well, how much does Chabad function in Cuba?
Very little underground only. Chabad got in trouble with the Jewish community in Cuba. Mm-hmm. And there was a little bit of argument. How can I say this and be diplomatic about it? In Cuba, the mentality of everybody is equal is prevalent everywhere. So Chabad, not considering some people Jewish enough, or not considering some people real Jewish, or that does not go well. And therefore had not been very successful. I am trying to see if I can bridge that gap with what has been called modern Chabad.
Right.
People who are a little bit more tolerant.
Right. When do you think synagogue trips will be able to resume in all practice?
I will let you know after I come back, because I've been trying to get in touch with them and I have not been able to. Only one time I was able to reach one of these synagogues, the Sephardic synagogue, and it was because they needed some medicine that I was able to provide to them because I had it at my house.
Do you think there's any hope that the regime would change and become a free democratic country?
Define free democratic country. I believe that the economy will change, freedom of economy will change. And it is my bet and my belief that freedom of economy will bring freedom of expression and freedom of many other things. But it will not happen overnight. But not unlike Vietnam, China, and some other communist countries that are able to accept and live with a combination of social and private sectors, I believe that Cuba will get there.
Very good. So it's been fascinating being with you this evening, and now we feel like we really got to know you, and we want to join you on a mission from our synagogue one day, and we look forward to that opportunity, God willing.
I hope so. I hope so. One of my main things to do when I get this time is to get the people organized to sometime first or second quarter next year to start bringing groups. And yes, we are going to work with different synagogues and try to make the similar presentation to them and see if we can organize a series of trips that would be able to bring food, medicine, and more than anything else, Jewish support
right,
for the community.
Okay, well, is there anything you want to tell us in conclusion?
Well, when President Obama came to Cuba, and I was invited to go with the delegation because of what we were doing at the time of the tractors and all that, and we met several times. One of the times in which we met officially in front of all the big official people in Cuba, the one thing that I said to him, and by the way, I am a Republican, one of the things that I said to him was, I am proud of your courage for having done what you've done. So if there's anything that I can say to the Jewish community here in the US, is that I would be proud for you to have the courage to come and help.
Thank you very much, Saul, and keep up your great work on behalf of the community of Cuba and bridging our communities to your community and keeping your heritage alive.
Thank you. It is an honor to me.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We have a beautiful attendance tonight. Saul, I want you to know many people tuned in tonight for your talk. It was very popular and we really appreciate the connection we made with you.
Remember, there's a lot of Cubans and Cuban Jews.
Yes. If you read if you listen to read some of the comments in the chat box, you'll see a lot of people are talking about personal memories or appearance or connection between the Florida community and the Cuban community. Yes.
Well, hopefully we're going to be able to get in touch with you and get some of the exactly what you just said. As I understand that you're also taping.
Yes.
The event, so we would get in touch with you guys and see how we can share that.
Okay, beautiful. Lila Tov, have a good night, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good night, a pleasure. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Thank you.